Okay, we're 2 minutes past the hour and it's time to get going. We have lots to cover in this session. Good morning, everyone. My name is Steve Kenzie. I'm the Executive Director of the UN Global Compact Network UK. It's a pleasure to welcome you to Implementing Nature-Based Solutions for Net Positive Business, the 6th event of our Climate Action Summit. Before we get started, I have a bit of housekeeping to attend. Firstly, this event is being recorded and it will be available, the recording will be available after the session ends. Not immediately after the session ends, we will follow up with an email and a link to the recording, and it will be available on our website, but probably not until next week. Next, we are in webinar mode with this presentation, and that means that our audience will be muted and unable to turn on cameras throughout. But we're really keen to hear from you, and there are 2 ways for you to engage. First, maybe even most important, is the Q&A box. We've allocated fair bit of time at the end of the presentations for Q&A. We're really keen to be focusing in on the areas of most interest to you, and the best way you can express that interest is by putting a question in the Q&A and then keeping an eye on the Q&A box and voting for the questions that you want us to answer. And you can do that by clicking on the thumbs up, and that'll move the question up to the top and improve the likelihood that we get to it. Those of you that have been attending other sessions in the summit will have noted that we oftentimes are unable to get to all of the questions that have been asked. So it's really, really helpful to have your votes to help us focus in on your top priorities. The other way we want to hear from you is in the chat. So there should be a button at the bottom of your screen to open both the Q&A and the chat pop-out windows. We're really happy to have your comments. If you want to say hello, tell us what the weather's like, share your LinkedIn profile. That's what the chat is for. And do please use that to communicate with each other and with us. If you're having any sort of technical hiccups, that's the place to let us know about them, and we'll be watching that. But also keep an eye there, because we will be posting valuable links to subject matter that is raised during the presentations. So you will be able to dig deeper if you wish. Okay, if there are any technical issues, as I said, please use the chat. We have activated the live transcription. And so if you're going to use that feature, there's a button at the bottom of your screen to turn it on. Just please note that the captions are generated automatically by Zoom. We ask your forgiveness for any typos or mistakes, but they are completely beyond our control. And so we can only do so much there. And finally, if you are active on Twitter or LinkedIn, we would really appreciate you tagging us and also using hashtag CA Summit 2022 just to help generate some noise around the summit and the fantastic conversations that we've been having yesterday and this morning. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. If this is the first session you've joined as part of our summit or first UNGC UK webinar, then we are duty bound to tell you just a little bit about the UN Global Compact. We're the largest corporate sustainability initiative in the world. We have over 17,000 companies participating, another 4,000 non-business organizations. They have made a commitment, a CEO commitment, to our 10 principles. These principles are drawn from UN treaties in the areas of human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. They are truly universal and provide a rock-solid foundation for any corporate sustainability program. To join our initiative, your CEO needs to commit to operationalizing those principles, to reporting annually on the progress you're making towards achieving them, and to support the wider UN development agenda, which is, of course, at the moment, best reflected in the Sustainable Development Goals. Here in the UK network and in our our fellow networks around the world. There are over 70 global compact networks around the world. Our role is to work more closely with the companies in our countries to support the commitments that they've made. We organize well over 100 events a year to that end. If you're not already participating in the Global Compact, there's some links in the chat. We strongly encourage you to check those out and get in touch if you're interested. All right, thank you very much. And now, next slide. We just finished earlier this morning a great first session of the day looking at nature-related frameworks for managing risk. And now we're really excited to get stuck into nature-based solutions and how these can enable businesses to give back to people and the planet. I'm delighted to be joined today by Sally Uren, CEO of Forum for the Future, Didier Bergeret, Social Sustainability Director of the Consumer Goods Forum, João Teixeira, Sustainability Manager from Natura & Co. LATAM, and apologies if I really destroyed your last name there, João. And finally, Vanessa Maire, Global Head of Regenerative Agriculture, Strategy and Operations at Diageo. Like in our previous sessions, each speaker is going to be providing a brief presentation, and then we'll have about 35 minutes for Q&A. First up, we're going to hear from Sally, and it is my honor to hand over the microphone to you.
Thank you very much, Steve. Great to be here today. I've been asked to set the scene, to shine a light on why now is such an important moment in time to think about nature-based solutions. Next slide, please. Just a little bit about Forum for the Future. If you don't know us, we are a sustainability non-profit based here in Europe, US, India, and Singapore. We're pretty small, but we have a very big ambition, and that is to accelerate the transformation to what we used to call a sustainable future, but we now describe as a just and regenerative future. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment. Next slide, please. And the next one, actually, I've got lots of headers in here, which I now realise is a bit of a flaw. I just wanted to start with a reflection of this moment in time. And I'm very much reminded of the opening of A Tale of Two Cities by Dickens. In many ways, this is the worst of times. You only need to screen through a 24-hour news cycle to see the chaos and the distress, the disturbance in the world around us. And yet, perhaps it's also the best of times, because actually we have the tools, the insights, the capability, the innovation to create the future that we want. So very much, I personally feel that we are at this crossroads. We could choose a path which might be a slightly better version of where we've come from, or we could choose a path that actually involves the fundamental rewiring of our systems, the reconfiguration of our food, our energy, our health system, and also the global economy, a pathway of deep transformation. And actually nature-based solutions are a key element of that. Next slide, please. And it's at this crossroads where it's really worth thinking about, where does corporate sustainability need to go next? Where should it be at this moment in time? And we've definitely seen over the last 10 to 15 years a pretty swift evolution of corporate sustainability. Some might say not swift enough, but it's definitely evolved from, we started off minimizing negative impacts, sustainability 1.0. Then 10 or so years ago, we started to hear carbon neutrality, water neutrality, waste neutrality. And then 8 years ago, along with WWF and the Climate Group, Forum for the Future published the Principles for Net Positive, really urging businesses to put more back into society, more back into the environment than they take out. And Net Positive is pretty ambitious. If we just move to the next slide, I still believe Net Positive is really ambitious. However, without changing our underlying systems, it actually isn't enough. If you can imagine a bucket with a hole in it, and we just keep filling up that bucket, unless we fix the hole, we're going to need to keep filling the bucket. And so I've got a quote here that we heard in the financial crash of the 2008 years, where we often heard, in order to effectively bail out nature, if nature was a bank, it would have been bailed out a long time ago. And for a long time, that made so much sense to me, because we know that our stocks of natural capital are perilously low. But actually, in order to bail out nature in the long term, we must create the conditions in which natural and social capital can regenerate and thrive themselves. And so if we move to the next slide, that's why at Forum for the Future, we're now talking about Sustainability 4.0, which is actually net positive plus driving systems change, reconfiguring our food system, our health system, to create the conditions in which people and planet will flourish into the long term, and shifting from those degenerative behaviors, outcomes, practices, extractive business models, to those business models that actually can allow regeneration of nature. And clearly, nature-based solutions have a clear role to play here. Can we move to the next slide, please? So what do we mean by a just and regenerative approach? Absolutely recognizing planetary boundaries, but critically what we've done with our definition of just and regenerative, and you can download our business transformation compass, it's available on our website. I'll try and put a link in fact, I can see it's gone into the chat there. Please take a look. It's a vision and a framework for just and regenerative business, because we really need to get serious about this next wave of corporate sustainability. And what we've tried to do is to really integrate the E and the S. One of the reasons why we haven't made the progress we need to make is because we've tended to deal with environmental and social issues separately. And critically, we need to think about new ways of creating and distributing value. And so just and regenerative also understands humans are a fundamental part of nature. Again, that's where the potential of nature-based solutions becomes really potent, and is underpinned by shifting the systems around us. Next slide, please. So what could just and regenerative look like then? And I've just taken corporate operations and our approach to climate to just try and bring this to life. So if we move to the next slide, please. So sorry about all the words, but again, you can download the Business Transformation Compass to get more details. So if we take a just and regenerative approach, then what does that look like when it comes to operations? Firstly, it's about, yes, building capacity of our staff, our employees, but on the basis of jointly identified needs. One of the big differences around a just and regenerative approach, and this is really relevant to nature-based solutions, is that we shift from saying what our employees need is ... what our communities need is ... to actually working with our employees, working with our communities to understand, well, what is it that they think they need? And one of the challenges around nature-based solutions is that we're often seeing a top-down approach to both the ideation and the implementation. And what we really, really need, and I'm sure we'll hear more about this today, is actually really close cooperation, a participatory approach with those communities actually that are really enabling the realization of nature-based solutions into the play. And so just again, building on operations, it's really showcasing how these high environmental social parameters can really make a difference. But critically, it's about advocacy. At this moment in time, at this crossroads, we need the private sector to be much more vocal about the enabling policy that's really needed to drive the ambition of the Sustainable Development Goals. And again, when we're thinking about innovation, it's human-centered innovation, human-centered design. We move to the next slide. And the next slide just shines a light on, well, what happens when we apply just and regenerative to climate. And critically, the first thing that happens is that we pull forward all of those timescales. 2050 is simply too late to get to net zero for Scope 3 carbon emissions. We have to get there as soon as possible. We also need to redesign our business models to move away from these carbon intensive activities. Again, we see advocacy being really critical in our approach here. And when we start to think about just and regenerative, we make the link between climate and nature and also health. And that's where, again, nature-based solutions have such potential. Not only do they help us mitigate against climate, building adaptation, but often solutions also improve health outcomes by improving air quality, for example. And critically, when we think about Scope 3 carbon emission reductions, one of the biggest challenges that we have, a just and regenerative approach suggests that we work with the supply chain, not take a top-down approach, and actually invest in the supply chain through long-term contracts, through long-term partnering, to enable the supply chain to adapt and mitigate climate risk. And critically, again, really important for nature-based solutions where a lot of the knowledge is held by Indigenous communities, we must support historically disadvantaged citizens and really create the conditions in which those whose voices have not been heard in the climate debate are enabled to be heard. The final unlock, and I'm just going to finish here, is the next slide. What we've discovered through all of our work is that actually our mindsets, the stories we tell ourselves, the narratives that we spread into the world around us, are really critical. And within the business transformation compass, we talk about 4 nested mindsets. The risk mitigation mindset, where we're just trying to be less harmful. Moving to the do good mindset. Yes, we're beginning to take a net positive approach, but where we need to be is that just and regenerative mindset. Even at the start of our sustainability journey, adopting a mindset where we see potential, not problems, where we see the linkages between environmental and social, where we try and ensure that everything we do drives multiple benefits in multiple systems. Again, nature-based solutions has that potential. If we adopt that mindset, we get acceleration no matter where we are on our sustainability journey. And so what I want to leave you with is this moment in time, worst of times, the best of times, we know what we need to do. It's how we do it that's going to be really, really important. And adopting a just and regenerative mindset is going to be super critical to ensuring that nature-based solutions are part of the pathway for this just and regenerative future that we know we must create. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sally. That was fantastic. I mean, so many positive things, and I really like that mindset framing. I think that's something that we all need to take on board as individuals, as well as trying to project that into our organizations. And a couple of other things that came up yesterday. Our panel also agreed that 2050 was too late, and I think companies need to recognize, again, at the risk of falling into the lowest mindset, but we can't wait for governments. I think business needs to recognize that what's an acceptable target for net zero is going to change. Everybody already knows 2050 is too late, and legislation and expectations are going to start to reflect that more and more. And I really appreciated also your framing of reporting as showcasing, because we talk so much about reporting as just being a burden, and I'm often having to answer people about we'd rather be out there doing stuff rather than talking about doing it. But I think what you're saying is that actually talking about doing it is also really important as a way of inspiring others and creating social norms that others can then follow on from. So I look forward to getting into these things further in the Q&A. So now, though, we're going to move on to Didier.
Yes. Hello.
Hi, Didier. Off you go. Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Didier from the Consumer Goods Forum. I hope you. Yeah, perfect. I'm sorry. I'm actually calling from an airport, which is not totally climate friendly, but I'm in Kuala Lumpur working on forest, which is the connection will be good. So I'm working for the Consumer Goods Forum, which is a large business that aims at getting the industry to work on positive change that no company can achieve alone. And so we have been working on various sustainability coalition, and the one I'm going to talk about today is our Forest Positive Coalition of Action, which obviously is anchored in nature positive ideas. Moving us on to the next slide, the CGF membership is around 400 members, but Can we move on to the next slide? Sorry, Rob. Yeah, perfect. But the coalition, so the one just before, the coalition of action when it comes to forest positive is 23 large multinationals covering the food and non-food and retail industry of our sector, and making sure that we committed to remove forest degradation and deforestation overall from our value chain. And we do so by connecting to other coalitions, notably on human rights and on sustainable supply chains. Moving us on to the next slide. We have a simple theory of change where we intend to achieve our goals, which is we need to become forest positive business. So that's from a supply chain management perspective, but we also need to put more back to nature. And that's the landscape engagement that sort of comes together with being forest positive business and, let's say, bringing back to nature what we use her from, which is the commodity we use to deliver the products to sell to our consumers. So moving us on to the next slide, the question is, how do we do this? Well, at first, why is it important? Because like forests continue to disappear at alarming rates, but also, I mean, we all understand that healthy ecosystems provide good productive support for businesses to strive. So we need to transform the way we do business and have nature totally in mind by guaranteeing that not only do we source sustainable commodities, but that we transform the way we do business to help protect, restore, and ensure the health of the world's forest, while at the same time, as was mentioned before, guaranteeing that we have a people positive and climate positive outcomes as well. So next slide will tell us, sorry, the key things to remember: the amount of forest that is lost each year, which is tremendous. The fact that 2/3 of the world's biodiversity is supported by forests, and that 1.6 billion people, again, strive thanks to forests. So next to the climate challenges, we always need to keep that in mind, as was concretely highlighted by my panelists before. Moving us on. How do we intend to drive sector-wide transformation? It starts with us. I mean, as businesses, our members committed to be forest positive themselves and to put it at the core of the DNA of their operations. The idea is really to prioritize forest positive. Then on the next slide, the idea is to get this commitment shared across the value chain by engaging upstream with suppliers and traders that are key actors in our value chain, and guaranteeing that they can become forest positive businesses themselves. For that, we have 4 commodity roadmaps covering beef, pulp and paper, and fiber-based, which as an industry, we do have the best leverage. And we develop guidance and tools that help not only to monitor that deforestation is not happening, but also to anticipate where it could happen so as to have preventive actions. Moving us on to the next slide, the idea again is that all of this work needs to be anchored into forest positive landscape. And our ambition is really to have a people, climate, nature, landscape ambition and strategy, with the key objective, which is very important, I think, to keep in mind whenever you speak about nature-based solutions, is what are you trying to achieve? Well, for our ambition, the idea is really to look at how much of hectares do we take from forests, do we use as land to produce all the commodities that are necessary for the produce we intend to have in our shelves, and to cover this production-based footprint to forest positive by 2030 with relevant landscape projects that I will detail a bit more later on. Then next slide, it tells us like the final circle of this. We realize that, of course, we cannot, as businesses alone, guarantee that deforestation will no longer be a reality. We need to engage with stakeholders, with governments, and build those enabling environments for forest conservation and protection. And this is why we are trying to connect as much as we can on relevant geographies, both on the demand side and on the production side, to guarantee that all the issues at hand and all the regulations that are coming up are supporting this forest positive ambition. Moving us on then to focus a little more on, well, we were speaking about reporting. Obviously, we are also having to do this exercise, and we launched the second report on progress just a couple of weeks ago at the Climate Week New York, highlighting how we are performing against the commodity roadmap KPIs and how our landscape ambition is actually evolving. So the next slide is about typically production landscape engagement, which is a nature-based type of solution. What is important here is that many companies do want to work on landscape, do want to have a strong deforestation strategy and effectively contribute to giving back to nature. What we realized is that even with the size of our companies, many didn't have yet a very thorough and robust landscape approach, and that it was possibly not driving the best impact to let them invent their new solution. So what we did is to decide to look at what projects were already existing in the many value chains we cover and see how we could select some that, if were to be given an influx of cash from our members, would effectively maximize the impact that they have. And so we created a selection grid. We made a call for expression of interest, asking exactly that to the stakeholders that were driving existing landscape programs that were well established. What could you do better or more if you were to be supported by some of our members? And so we're creating a portfolio of landscape initiatives featuring 22 ones in 6 countries at this stage, and it's going to be expanded. And the idea is really that it helps people not to reinvent the wheel and to spend some time and money on developing something that they could actually have done better if they were to tag along an existing program that may not be 100% connected to their value chain or geographies of operations, but that still gives back to nature by investing in relevant landscape for our wider industry rather than focusing on a typical company scope alone. And so we are now in the learning phase. We just launched this last year, and now we gave us 2 years to see how the portfolio could effectively benefit companies and how they were working around those projects and connecting with new stakeholders, allowing us as well to calculate the collective production-based footprint. That would be a necessary figures expressed in hectares. That will be the ambition for us to cover by 2030. And on the next slide, just looking at how the bigger picture comes in, our collaborative approach is really about connecting the necessary dots that Forum for the Future mentioned earlier. It's the people, nature, climate, positive outcomes that we are looking into. And many of the 22 projects we selected are having at least one of those, but many times a connection between nature and people, notably with projects that are meant to help community-based restoration in the palm oil sector, or the protection of the Malaysian tiger with the help of local communities as well. And so this type of project, they already exist. The idea of nature-based solutions is probably also to look at what already exists, because there are plenty of projects that are there and need some further support. Not reinventing the wheel is sometimes the best and most optimized action to give back to nature. And that's really something that we believe in. And the power of collective action is all the more important, especially when you want to act in a long-lasting, impactful way, notably on nature. I think I have one final slide, but that would be it. It was just about the phased approach to deliver the landscape ambition. And as you could see, so it's very tiny, but on the right-hand side, when it comes to the different people, nature, and climate positive goals, we also connect with existing initiatives, notably OP2B, which is One Planet Business for Biodiversity, which is developing guidance, notably on regenerative agriculture. The idea is, let's not do this alone and make sure that we connect the dots, enhance collaboration, all up for the benefit of nature at a very global scale. And that's it. For me, the last slide is just about the context, should you be interested in learning some more and joining the Forest Positive journey.
Thank you very much, Didier. That was, again, really positive. So encouraging to see such an important sector leading the charge, and to see that alignment also with what Sally was saying about the need for it to be, people positive as well, and that we're taking a properly holistic approach. That's great, and I look forward to getting stuck in further. Great to see some questions already coming into the Q&A. Please keep them going there and not into the chat box. And remember to vote for the questions that you'd like us to start with. That's really very, very helpful. Okay, next up, we have João.
Hello, good morning for everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm sorry about my Brazilian accent, but I'm sure that my English is better than Portuguese of most of you. Today, I'm going to share a bit of our project regarding palm oil in ecological production systems. I'm João Teixeira, Sustainability Manager at Natura Latin America. And as I mentioned, I'm going to try to say and bring a practical case that we have been studying for some years here in the Amazon region. Next slide, please. So palm oil, as most of you know, it's one of the most consumed oil in the world. Here in Brazil, we call it as dende oil, and that's why we call SAF Dende project. And it's used everywhere, from food to personal care products. And I think the main point here is how we can produce it sustainably or even in a regenerative way to bring this to the real solution. So the project was inspired by forests to solve this challenge, considering the vision that in nature all processes are interconnected. There is no solitary plants. They live in a large network of collaboration. Relationships are rich, diverse, and complex, and we humans are also part of those relationships. So the agroforestry system with palm is one of the ways we found to imitate the complex ecosystems of the nature. In the same area, we are trying to plant different types of species with trees, with the goal to improve land use and produce it in a regenerative manner. And Natura has for long been engaging with traditional communities in the Amazon region to supply biodiversity raw ingredients that we use in our products. And for this specific project, we have been engaging with Canta, a cooperative in the Pará states of Brazil. That is actually a Japanese immigrant settlement in this region, and they have been there for more than a century. And for the past 34 years, they have a long experience in developing agroforestry systems for the native species that they use and produce in the region. Next slide, please. So here, just to talk briefly about Natura & Co, we are comprised of Natura, Avon, The Body Shop, and Aesop brands. And in 2020, we launched our 2030 Commitment to Life vision in order to address climate crisis, protect the Amazon, ensure equality and inclusion, and also how we can shift our business towards circularity and regeneration. The principle behind this vision is to provide solutions for the main social environmental problems the world is facing, generating positive impact. And produce palm oil in agroforestry systems is a way that we could deliver several of the goals of these visions and also generate a number of benefits for the farmers and for the planet. Next slide, please. So just taking a look in our footprint and how palm oil and derivatives play a role in our strategy. Here we can see that 18% of our absolute emissions came from raw ingredients. And when we take a closer look into the categories, soap, for example, has more than 90% of palm oil in its bill of material, and other categories like body and hair also have high volumes of palm derivatives that we use to manufacture them. So looking at the relevance of palm oil in our footprint, and also understanding that the palm is a critical material and supply chain, we have been pursuing control measures to mitigate any risk that we may have in this supply chain. And some way, SAF Dende project act as a one-stop solution for solving any risk that we have in this commodity supply, but also how it generates positive impact for the nature and the planets and the people. Next slide, please. So really the question is how to develop nature-based solution that address all risk exposure that we have for using palm oil, and how it also promotes a net positive impact that guides our business towards net zero transition. Next slide, please. So here I bring a little bit more context for what is happening in the biodiverse project. It's a consortium of different commercial species with ecological management. So what we understand that palm tree is not a problem. The issue is how we produce it, most of the times in monoculture systems, and without taking care of the environment, are not giving the right value for the people that work in the field. So our project aims to produce those different commercial species, regenerated, degraded land, and at the same time use the species like candiroba, acai, black pepper, cocoa, and of course palm. And the richness of the species promotes biodiversity in the region, and using an agricultural approach that regenerates the soil and help us rethink and improve our agricultural production. Furthermore, the systems create more possibilities of earnings for the smallholder farmers. After all, unlike the conventional approach, which provides a single product, agroforestry systems is a diverse source of income for farmers. And when we compare to monoculture, as you can see in those images, the sustainable system is more productive and profitable because we have actually less plants per hectare, but the productivity of those trees are higher. And when we look at the aggregated yield of different species, it's undoubtedly a good alternative system for producing palm oil. So as we can see, the solution combines biodiversity with good agricultural practice, connected and intelligent like forests. The project has a diversity as a key element of our main goal here. So generating net positive impact and contributing with several of sustainable development goals. Next slide, please. And so how we showcase that these nature-based solutions actually is a low carbon technology. When we look into the management styles that we apply in the field, the fertilizer is generated within the systems itself. And through the agroecological management of this land, we mimic the nature illustration of the circular economy. So the entry fruits, branches, and the pruning, and all the leaves that fall from the trees increase the fertility of the land, producing a living soil rich in carbon. And in a constant exchange of information and nutrients, the system favors the efficient use of natural resources and even better resists to the impacts of the climate change. So it's also a resilient system within the view that we have for the impacts of climate change in the region. And in terms of carbon emissions, the systems results in a lower footprint, not only because of the soil management and lower use of chemical fertilizers, but also because we distribute and allocate the footprint for each of the product yield of the different species. So with this, we actually can have a lower footprint for each one of the species that we produce in the land. And we have been always studying the feasibility of the system to generate carbon removals, taking into consideration the previous use of the land. So the carbon stock before and after the implementation of agroforests, understanding that the agroforests act as a carbon sink, not only by the growth of trees, but also of increase of the carbon in the soil. Next slide, please. This is just a timeline of the project. As I mentioned, we have been studying this project for more than 13 years, since 2007, when we started the implementation with 3 units of smallholder farmers within those cooperatives of Canta. And we have managed different profiles of smallholder farmers and formats design in order to prove the economic viability of the system. And also with this long-term period of research, we generate KPIs that point out the positive impacts for people and nature. After that, in 2020, we are doing the first trial of scaling up the systems with different cooperative members of Canta, and looking to alternative solutions for the main issues and challenges of implementation that we have faced in the field, and how, of course, we can guarantee the continuity of farmers' engagement to maintain the agroforestry system for a long time, but we expect at least 30 years to guarantee that we have permanence of the carbon as well. And from 2023 on, we have taken the challenge to another step and aim to connect with different partners of our network, searching new potential areas to implement agroforestry systems in the greater land, or even making the transition of extensive monoculture to agroforestry systems. So we have been articulating with multiple stakeholders, off-takers, and to promote this some way multiple choice of how we understand that each farmer could build up the system. Next slide, please. Finally, and just bringing you some of the challenges we face for scaling up the systems. We have the first point, of course, is funding. How we have appropriate funding systems for the farmers, not only to the implementation of the agroforest that is very high demand in resources, but also how we understand over the years the need of resources, because some species you will enter just in the 4th year of the implementation, and some other you will take out of the system. And this is also a point that we need to understand, how we actually again bring some financial mechanisms for the farmers, not only in terms of technical management, but also how we can develop further some techniques with the farmers to improve the land. Of course, one key issue problem is environmental and land compliance here in Brazil, and specifically in Amazon region is very difficult to prove land rights and land tenure. So how we can improve not only the time but the cost as well of doing this due diligence, and some way facilitates the enter of a farmer in the program once we have set the principles and the main requirements regarding mainly of deforestation or the land use before the implementation of agroforestry systems. Also, now connecting the points to access the markets, how we build up agreements with the cooperative, not only for the palm but for all the other species in the systems. How we purchase long-term agreements in order to guarantee that they will have a market for the products that they have, and also how we can understand better the transition from monoculture to agroforestry system, and showing the farmers that this is a good option for them. And finally, labor demand. This is a point that is critical. We have seen that there's a lack of technical workers to implement the SAF, the agroforestry system, and how we produce it, and also how we can include mechanized alternatives in order to bring more easily the management of the field to the farmers. and also how we can guarantee that all the workers in the field are taking a living wage at the minimum. So this is also a point that we have been trying to implement and improve over time. I think I passed a little bit my time, so this is my final slide, and I appreciate your time and attention. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, João. That's really interesting, and it's fabulous to have the insights from a leading organization like yours that's so heavily invested in this. I'm looking forward to coming back to you in the Q&A. I'm very interested in hearing how you actually get those small farmers engaging and into the programming, whether, you know, carrot versus stick, and just how that works. But first, let's hear from Vanessa. Vanessa's going to take control now and share her screen, and we'll hopefully without any hiccups. Looking good. So far, I don't see any slides just yet, but it looks like it's coming. There we go. Perfect. Vanessa, over to you.
Hi all, can you hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic. So I'm not sure whether you can see the slide still.
Yes, all good.
You can see the slide, all good, fantastic. So first of all, thank you, João. Really comprehensive set of slides. Really good to see the Natura strategy on agroforestry model, and also thank you for the UN Global Compact team for having me on this panel. So I'll give you a bit of an introduction to Diageo's approach and strategy. We essentially have made a regenerative agriculture commitment as part of our Spirit of Progress Society 2030. So today, like most other FMCG companies, we've got a fairly significant proportion of our global GHG footprint that resides within our scope 3. Okay, and a third of that comes from the production and sourcing of our raw materials. So we've got about 2.2 million metric tons every year that are sort of entering our supply chain to make the products that we take to market. Barley, agave, wheat, maize, rice, and sugar are the key sort of raw materials that we have in our raw material footprints today. And with this significant challenge, it represents multiple opportunities, right? Diageo has also set a scope 3 target, right? So it's the commitment to reduce our scope 3 emissions by 2030 by 50%, right? So it's really important that we look to understand how regenerative agriculture models can help us not only decarbonize, right, to help us meet our scope 3 target reduction goals, but also to build that ecosystem resilience. We've seen this past summer significant droughts, right? It couldn't be more telling. We are really venturing into a climate emergency, and we need to repair not only soil, but the way we are producing food today. So in terms of the key principles, so we've got essentially, and I probably will put you on, we've got essentially key principles today. So we want to regenerate more than just farms, right? We want to regenerate and transform landscapes. Farmers, communities, and value chain partners are at the center of that strategy, right? Typically, as an FMCG company, we do not have the direct relationship and direct farmer reach, right? So we really need to build those value chain collaborations with our supply chain partners and really start building those value propositions that are beneficial for the farmers, our suppliers, our ecosystem partners, and Diageo as well, right? Driving that sort of environmental and social benefits integrated approach for all involved is also really important. We hear about carbon a lot these days, and of course it's really important, but there are other ecosystem services that we also need to focus on, right? So it adds a bit more complexity, but this is essentially what we need to go after. And of course, that sort of evidence-based approach, right? Really data-driven, right? Really leveraging the science today, but also digitizing your supply chain so that you keep getting informed with the data, and that's going to be informing your next steps. I think as an industry, maybe measuring was not our forte in the past decades, and we need to get closer to that data to be able to do more in the future. So I'm just going to spend a bit of time on setting as well, because building on Sally's point and João's point, but also even Didier's point, right? We all talk about the same thing, right? We're talking about food system transformations at the landscape level, really generating different kinds of values, right? And generating different kinds of impacts as well. And of course, there's lots of different actors interacting within that system. But we want to be building on those elements, and the co-financing will be important, really identifying the synergies between the likes of Diageo, but other companies in that system will be really important. So sometimes visualizing things can really help, and that's a visual sort of piece that's been directly extracted from the International Platform for Incenting. It's really important to help us see that the value stays within the system, right? So I'm going to be telling you a little bit more about the Guinness pilot. So some of you may have seen the news. So we launched our first Guinness barley pilot back in February this year. So typically we're working with barley farmers, right? And it's a brand-led approach, because ultimately 100% of our barley today for the Guinness beer is actually being sourced from Ireland. So that connection to that particular country and that sort of sourcing footprint is really important for our brand, but also for the investment that we want to make in that country going forward. There'll be many more pilots that will be rolling out in the next months and years to come, really to sort of iterate that approach that needs to be crop and geography specific. I'll tell you a little bit more on that later, but let's focus on the Guinness pilot initially. So typically, as I mentioned, so we want to be reducing our carbon emissions, right, through insetting strategies, working with value chain partners, and really understanding the art of the possible within those in-country regions, right? The ambition is to support the barley sector, right, to really protect and improve farmer livelihoods. We've seen as well the cost of production rising, especially on the fertilizer front, right, which is a big proportion of the cost of production for any farmers today. So trying to really leverage nature-based solutions, typically like cover crops, can really help support the decrease of the reliance on nitrogen fertilizers, but also locking the carbon into the soil. We'll be working with ecosystem partners, right, really building at different level, right? I talked about the collaboration that we have with our key suppliers and their farmer communities, but of course there is a policy landscape level that we need to help inform. So you really using that data-driven approach, collecting the information will help us as well inform future strategies at a policy level, because we'll have essentially created a community of practice and a platform that farmers can actually elevate their good work on, right? So we'll be looking at that specifically in the next few years. At the moment, we're sort of getting up and running. The farmer engagement process has taken quite a bit of time in the past 6 months to really listen to farmers and really understand where they were coming from. So progress to date. There'll be a more formal announcement, I think, either next week or the following one, that really sort of encapsulates the good work to date. But we've got to be really focusing on that farmer engagement piece. It's really important that they co-own the design of that process, right? We talk about regenerative agriculture standards and frameworks, right? But in practice, right, farmers are really driving this agenda and doing the work, right? So it's really important that they take part in the decision-making process, right? That we demystify the fear on either yield loss or grain quality decrease, right? And we need to sort of have those conversations at the farm level make them see the value through the data, through the trials, so that they can really be confidently taking on that transition pathway with us, right? So progress to date, yes, 40 farmers participating in the pilot, 500 hectares covered. We distributed the cover crop seeds earlier this year. They've been planted, and now we're hoping to sort of measure the value of cover crops as a nature-based solution within the soil, as I mentioned previously. Digitizing farms is an interesting one. I learned typically you would assume that farmers have a lot of data. Some have it, but they've not necessarily been matched with the technical partners that can actually read the data through a soil carbon analysis lens or a soil microbial activity lens, right? So trying to also play a role in bringing technical partners that have methodologies and expertise in understanding what that data looks like when we look at it closely, or taking the right level of soil samples through the right sample protocols so that the data can be analyzed in a different way and then given back to the farmers so that they can make more informed decisions. So the baselining is on the way. We will be essentially sharing more on that, but that's pretty much where we are on our journey with the Guinness pilot. And then, of course, I'll finish on a very good visual, right? Good things are taking roots. As I said, it's our first pilot launched this year, but we've got many more in the pipeline to really test and iterate across those key crops and geographies, really understanding the key practice levels, right, that can actually significantly impact positively our soil health, soil carbon, biodiversity, and water stewardship. It's going to be quite significant what we do in the next few years before we can be in a position to scale, because that test and learn approach is very much to help us calibrate the scaling, right? So we do want to keep highly adaptive, highly iterative, and then over time we'll have enough data points that are essentially confirming that the direction of travel is the right one. So I'll leave it there because we will have time for questions, but yes, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. All right. We're in gallery mode, and I think we've got everybody's camera on except Didier saving bandwidth, I suspect, and that's a good idea. It's not going to be possible for me to get visual signals from you, though, Didier. So if you want to come in, if I haven't expressly invited you to do so, perhaps just use the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen. Thanks very much to our audience, gold star audience today, with the questions and the voting. Really appreciate you engaging that way. It's really helpful. I'd like to maybe just jump the queue, though, notwithstanding everything I said. I want to circle back to João and Vanessa in particular, just to talk about how you're getting farmers to engage and what is the most persuasive argument to get them to join a pilot or to participate in your initiative? Maybe João, would you start, and then we could hear from Vanessa?
Yes, of course. So, Steve, it's the region that we are placing the program. It's very complex, and we have different types of farmers in the region. And the motivation of each one of them differs very much between each other. So we have mainly some farmers that have been in the cooperative for a long time, and they already has good knowledge of agroforestry systems and the benefits that this could give them, not only in terms of profitability but also in terms of how they see the restoration of nature using agroforestry systems. But for some others, we really need to include the commercial approach in order to make them see the benefits for them. But and also for that, today carbon credits also pose a very high opportunity for them, and of course, most of them doesn't understand what is the carbon credit market, but still they understand the value that the forests can have in terms of carbon credits and so on. But yeah, the point is how to bring them in a look that we are going to regenerate a degraded land or make the transition towards a monoculture systems to the agroforest. But there's several different opportunities that we can make it engage them with the project. Yeah.
So the improved yields right away would seem to be persuasive for a logical, evidence-based farmer. Do you sweeten the deal further with perhaps more advantageous contractual terms with Natura and Co, or is that necessary?
Yeah. Natura is acting as an off-taker of the palm oil of the systems. What we have trying nowadays is how we engage with other partners to also have long-term agreements for off-taking the other products of the system. Specifically, cocoa is one of the main species that we are also working on, that has a great market, specifically when we look to agroforest or regenerative agriculture. There are lots of companies looking at it as well.
Thank you. Vanessa, how did you get your 40 companies into the pilot? 40 farmers, but
oh yes, farmers, right.
By 2030, I think we'll have 40 companies across pilot after we've explored the synergies. But no, typically how you engage farmers and how you make them see the value of participating is through that sort of shared learning experience, right? Farmers are already sort of self-mobilizing in community of practices, right? But bringing additional technical partners and bringing that data-driven approach and the innovation, it's a mix of actors that you're putting together as part of that ecosystem approach, community of practice. Once you make them see the value of the data, right? Once you can show them the financial performance of a farm and the environmental performance of a farm side by side, it's a compelling argument, right? And that's what we're trying to do here. The sort of other incentives as well, I mean, it's financing the interventions, right? Soil samples can be quite costly for farmers to take on their own. They might not be sufficiently aware of what needs to be statistically representative as part of a soil sampling protocol, right? They may not be engaging today with the likes of Gold Standard and Vera, right? So trying to sort of facilitate not just that soil samples are being taken on their farm, but that it's respecting a fairly robust protocol that can be informing future decisions. Those are the interventions as well that that companies today can finance for farmers, so that they have more access to those knowledge hubs, to those interventions, typically cover crops as well. They could be planting cover crops today, right? They could have been fairly informed already. They could be championing regenerative agriculture practices already, but working with technical agronomic partners that will understand what is the cover crop seed mix that specific farms need to really lock in the value, the nitrogen, and building soil health. Those are the informations that we can sort of help link up to the farmers that are participating in the program. So at the moment, it's very much focused on that sort of voluntary and participatory approach. We're co-designing, we're sharing the challenges, we're sharing the opportunities, we're bringing the agronomic partners, the technical partners that can actually measure the data a bit differently, and then after that we go back to the drawing board together as a group to see what additional practices can be sort of stacked over time to build that resilience really.
Thank you both. Okay, looking at the questions that have come in, there is clearly a lot of interest in measuring. So let me recommend the session that we had this morning. So anybody that wasn't there might want to watch out for the recording, because we did talk a lot about frameworks and metrics and measuring, but it would be really great to hear from this group as well. So the first question is from Alex. How do you measure change? For instance, how is positive impact on biodiversity measured? But then Dominique also asks what metrics or measurements or standards can be placed for a net positive or even regenerative approach for the operative business. Now, she's saying, she or he is saying apart from water or CO2. But again, maybe Sally is, how can the mindset be formed in the daily business? So maybe with that last link to mindset, maybe Sally, you could share how you measure that transition in mindset, if that's even possible without hypnosis or and then maybe Didier, we could come to you and hear from you about metrics in your programs, if that's all right.
Yeah, measuring shifts in mindsets obviously is directly not that possible. Where it manifests itself is in the performance of the organization in terms of its carbon emissions, its social impact, and so forth. I guess, though, I do want to sound a caution about the fascination we have with measurement. I think it is really important to measure material impact areas to a business, because of course you need to know that you're making progress, and if you're publicly listed, you need to demonstrate to your shareholders that you're dealing with value at risk from climate, from biodiversity. And clearly it's really important to get those bits of data that relate to social performance, so community well-being, health and well-being amongst employees. However, I think the current fascination with endless ESG metrics reporting, I'm sorry to say, I think it's a really brilliant example of predatory delay. I think what's happening is we are getting obsessed about measuring to the nth degree, and actually all we're doing is avoiding addressing the real elephant in the room, which are patterns of consumption, the underlying business model, the structure of the economy. And so my advice to any organization is be clear about your material impact areas, environmental, social, measure those areas where you can, get qualitative reads where the quants aren't available, have a look at disclosure according to the Task Force on Climate-related Disclosure, the new nature-based disclosure, but pay attention to actually doing the stuff that minimizes your footprint. And when it comes to that journey from being slightly less harmful to doing no harm to just a regenerative, you can see an organization that is really serious about making a difference. And we have two of them on the call today. They are able to tell a story of how regenerative agriculture in both examples are really building out the delivery of the purpose of the organization. And you can tell how systems begin to shift. There's shifts in narratives, there's shifts in capital allocation. So finally, be clear, what is it you're trying to measure? Are you trying to measure how a system is shifting? Then that is narratives, it's flows of capitals. Are you trying to measure your direct impact as an organization? Then when it comes to carbon, super easy. There's good qualitative indicators on social. But are you trying to measure to the nth degree the non-material impact areas? If you are, don't bother. Put your time and energy in dealing with the big stuff.
Thanks, Sally. That clearly is resonating with our audience. It makes me think of it's a quote attributed to Einstein, but apparently it's something he had just on a little sign over his desk, something to the effect that not everything that matters can be measured, and not everything that can be measured matters. So it is really really key to have that materiality focus. Didier, did you want to bravely come in after that and talk about metrics? In fact, really welcome anybody to comment further on what are the material indicators that you think we should be focusing in on in this space.
Well, it's difficult to be relevant as a Sally, but I would actually try to complement what has just been said about measurement. It is important. We have KPIs for the implementation of our roadmap per commodity to track progress from a collective perspective. Now, if I look at our latest report just a couple of weeks ago, 62% of our members effectively responded to some of the KPIs. We don't get 100%. What does it tell you? You know, possibly nothing, or possibly that, you know, we didn't sell ourselves short with too easy KPIs to actually report against. And it's just that, you know, net zero or, you know, this absolute 100% is not sometimes, as they were saying, not really what matters. Is the journey. And many people are looking at how do you measure change? Well, you measure change notably by looking at what KPIs tell you that the DNA of the company has been seriously transformed to reflect forest positive or nature-based solutions, and that are effectively changing the system. And that can take multiple forms. So, I mean, vis-a-vis the questions on biodiversity or the nature-based solutions, actually, we could get as many measures as the relevance of the project. When I look at the Malaysian tiger protection program, there are specific KPIs to the population of tigers being protected, the breeds and stuff. It's always very specific to the project, as long as it matters and that it really helps in telling us what is the situation. It is relevant, but you pointed very well in this very English way of saying things. It's not everything that gets measured matters, and it doesn't matter sometimes to measure everything. And I think that the metrics is probably taking us away from the purpose. So let's make sure the metrics do deliver or help deliver the purpose, but focus on the purpose first, because that's really what imports. Notably, when I look at Diageo and working with 40 farmers, 500 hectares, concrete elements of the, you know, community of farmers that will benefit from a company plus value chain engagement. And that's what we want to see, because this is where the change begins, but this is also where the change lasts in a sustainable fashion.
Thanks, Didier. Vanessa, did you want to come in as well? João, did you want to come in?
I'm happy to come in because I think there's probably levels at which measurements need to be taking place. And Sally mentioned material areas, focusing on really what matters, really measuring where your impacts, your embedded impacts are coming from, right? Once you've done that prioritization mapping, right, that's when you need to sort of potentially shift to a project intervention mode and need to start tracking and monitoring the value that you're delivering against the baseline at a project level, right? For me, that's really important, because if we want to be convincing policymakers and other stakeholders and financing partners in the future, right, when you're ready to scale, you're going to need to have the right proof points to sort of essentially give a very strong model and direction of travel to the stakeholders that will be keen to onboard on the journey 5 years from now, right? So really taking a very strong baseline and starting to shift your impacts into ecosystem services values, right? That's where the monitoring, I think, needs to be a bit more advanced. And it needs to get granular for a period before you can sort of start scaling and be convincing other stakeholders that your journey is on the right track. You don't need to monitor soil carbon every year, right? That's a 3 to 5 year assessment that's redone to really see how much carbon you've locked into your system, right? Others are a bit more granular, a bit more frequent, but not everything needs to be measured annually, right? But you really need to sort of build that baseline really, really clearly from the get-go to inform what you're going to be doing, etc., etc. So super important to also differentiate between what we do as a company at a corporate level, right? And then what we do at a project level. And I think if I reflect on the past decades, the past few years, that companies have been really, really trying to get after the data at a project level, right? We were more comfortable building the narratives and shaping a case study, because at the time, maybe the measurements were not necessarily tracking the impact. That doesn't mean we didn't have the impacts, but I think that confidence building piece within the farming communities across the world, you're not going to ask a farmer to change its agronomic protocol, right? And you're not going to convince the agronomists that are working with farmers today to change how they teach agronomy, unless you've got the data and they have the confidence that what you're proposing is fairly sound. I mean, not just fairly sound, very good and very robust, right? So I just wanted to clarify that piece as well, because it's really important. We delinked the two.
Great point. Thank you. João, anything to add?
Yeah, I think I must agree with all the speeches of my colleagues. For me, as we have been studying this research project for more than 10 years, we have been engaging with different institutes here in Brazil to measure some of the impacts that the system can have. Not only we have one unit of a farmer that we implement a monetary antenna with Embrapa, that is the national agency for agriculture here in Brazil, and with this antenna, we are measuring the airflow and the flux of oxygen and water within those really inside the plot that we establish and implement the agroforestry system. And with that, we have lots of data to really prove the benefits of a system as this one that we are implementing in the field. But also, one key point that actually prove the benefit is talking to the farmer. Once you talk to the farmer and he can say to you if he's seen animals coming back to his land, or even understanding that inside the agroforestry system the temperature is totally different if you will go to a monoculture systems, and all of these some way prove the benefits in terms of not only biodiversity but also when we talk about carbon stock. We can measure the carbon stock in the soil and so on. And yeah, I think as everybody mentioned, that we can measure almost everything, but the point is to do in practice and in the field and see how this actually can go forward and scale to a more landscape approach that really will make a huge difference in a certain region. Yeah.
Okay, thanks everyone. Time is running short now, so I want to go back to you, Sally. You have inspired Peter and I think everyone else with your sort of mindset hierarchy. Could we turn to the practical aspects of that, and what are you doing at Forum for the Future to make it real? So his exact words, do you have practical thoughts on how you get everyone in a business, for example, to think in a just and regenerative mindset to make major inroads and strides forward?
Great question. And there are, I think, a number of approaches you can take, but the approach that we use probably the most consistently at Forum, and the clue is in the title of our organization, is our futures tools and techniques. I've actually just come back from Europe running a 3-day session with a board of an organization who wanted to really rethink their purpose and get more serious about sort of embracing just and regenerative. And what we did is we took the participants into the world of 2030, and we've certainly done this with Diageo too in the past, through the strategy work that we were involved with a couple of years ago. But one of the most effective ways of really opening up people's minds to thinking differently is to locate them in the future. And so if you go into 2030, you're in a world where, I hope, serious reductions have been made in carbon, a world where we've seen the scaling of nature-based solutions to a large extent, a world where critically pathways to value creation have shifted from pathways today. So we will have gone some way to internalizing rather all these externalities. And putting people into future prompts the question, well, what are the risks to your business? What are the opportunities to your business in this future? And we use scenarios a lot. And we've used scenarios for certain sectors where they've put themselves into these future scenarios and said, actually, we can't really exist in this future because how we make money today doesn't work in this future, because actually there's now a price on carbon. There are now serious water shortages. There are real disruptions to our supply chains. And so the biggest stimulus, in other words, for doing things differently is to make it real. And in many ways, making it real is easier today. And that's why it's so hard for all of us, because we're seeing climate changes manifest around us. But actually locating someone into the future and saying, okay, in this future, what are the risks to your business? What are the opportunities? It's just a brilliant way of saying, if you want to avoid that pretty bleak future that you can now see for yourself, let's think differently. Because my final point would be, the future isn't written. The future is something we can all create. And actually shifting our mindset today and embracing this notion of just and regenerative will increase our chances of the future playing out in the way that we want it to play out. The world around us today, our economy, our society, it's a function of the decisions we made yesterday. The decisions we make today will determine what happens tomorrow. And so that's another really good message to communicate to people. And I saw there was a question around SMEs. For an SME, really practically, just look at your energy consumption. It will save you money. But actually, even the smallest organization can think about this just and regenerative mindset. And it's about how you do things. So even if your scope of impact is quite small, how you go about your day-to-day business will really, really make a difference.
Thanks, Sally. Yeah, I think that's it. For a smaller organization, it might be a little bit more on the just side. And everybody can do that. But always also look into regenerative. And I was just going to comment as well how TCFD and soon the TNFD with their focus on scenarios is a really helpful way of getting us looking into the future and projecting forward. I know you might have to jump off, so thank you very much for joining. I'm going to try and squeeze in another question or two, because I would like to hear from others on what Steph is asking about the low-hanging fruit for SMEs. So maybe from a more nature perspective, and I know you guys are mostly representing larger organizations, but you are engaging, I trust, SMEs in your supply chain. So and actually, Didier, maybe you have some smaller retailers that are participants. Does someone want to start about, what's your sort of top recommendation for an SME? Where should they start on the nature agenda? Or, yeah, Vanessa, you seem like you're leaning in.
It's a very important question and very topical. I remember WBCSD doing a bit of work on how we accelerate that transition for SMEs across the world. And ultimately, it's an important topic, right? Because multinational companies, although they are incredibly visible because we have those opportunities to get looped in the media attention under the scrutiny of media, but also having those opportunities to speak on panels like today. SMEs don't necessarily have the opportunity to really access those knowledge hubs, right? So we need to probably do a better job as companies to develop the right toolkits and guides to make sure that they are onboarded on that transition as well.
Thanks, Vanessa. Didier, João, or shall we move on? Yeah, go ahead.
No, I think that, like I said, you see, for instance, this is exactly what we had in mind, is just provide visibility to good projects by selecting them and make sure that, SMEs that don't have, the resources to build their own, design their own, could also be interested in existing ones and see how they could connect with their means and resources, but without having to spend the time to actually identify those and define if they would effectively be impactful. So that's why we do the job as an industry association for everybody, providing visibility to good projects and making sure that, hey, if you want to invest somewhere, you may need to look so far. There are actually good things happening either around, or you can look at the portfolio of projects that we have, which covers the commodities we're in, so beef, palm oil, and soy largely. As I said, as long as you do something, it's always a good thing. It's also, for me, very important. It's very good to be close to your value chain, but sometimes giving back to nature doesn't need for you to be, totally linked to your value chain or your geography. It's actually now a global thinking that you need to have, and you don't need to have this very, specific project that would make total sense and tick all the boxes for your own business. Having a very altruistic sort of approach to say, hey, there is this good project and I like it. And even though it's not my commodity or not my geography, I still think it's a very valuable one. So let's give back to nature by investing in this project. That's something that doesn't take much to realize and that provides a lot of good impact.
Like a beehive on the roof. I mean, it seems a bit random, but it has really positive impacts, and it's within the means of most companies to do something like that. And it creates a lot of positive energy amongst employees that you are connecting into this agenda. So yeah. João, did you want to add?
Yeah, just a brief comment, because as I mentioned, Natura has long been partnered with traditional communities, but they are always organized in cooperative or associations, and we have been working with more than 40 cooperatives in the Amazon region, providing raw ingredients from the biodiversity, not only Brazilian nuts, açaí, and so others Brazilians raw ingredients, and those cooperatives most of the time have very difficult access to markets, and I think once there is also a main or a bigger player as Natura working with them, sometimes you can help them to structure not only in an organizational way but also financial, technical, to understand the profit and loss of their business, and how we actually connect to other off-takers, because Natura doesn't has a unique supply from every one of this each one of those communities. And so it's really important how also the main players help those SMEs to structure them and help them to access markets. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, we've run out of time now. I want to just say a word to Chrysula. I'm thinking you're saying tree planting is often a scam, and I think that there's for sure the offsetting industry has some PR challenges that they need to work out. But I think it's really interesting how carbon credits are. It was mentioned today, and it is an important underlying theme, I think, to a lot of nature-based solutions. And in our next session, we are going to be talking about that. So I'm going to tell you about that in just a second, and hopefully people will be able to join us. For now, I want to just say a huge thank you to Sally in absentia, to Didier, to João, to Vanessa for your contributions today. It's been really fabulous having you with us under challenging circumstances. Really appreciate you, Didier, signing in from the airport, and it's such a time zone as well. It's really fantastic of you. Thank you very, very much. Thanks to the audience for giving us such great questions to work with, and for being so engaged in the chat and in the Q&A. So as I said, coming up in just an hour, our next session, Investing in Nature. We're going to delve into how and why business should mobilize capital for nature-based solutions, and examine growing investor expectations and requirements for nature and biodiversity to be considered in investment portfolios. And as I said, I think that question around carbon credits is bound to come up there. We've got another fabulous lineup of speakers for that session from the UNEP Finance Initiative, from Aviva Investors, and from the University of Oxford. So I do hope you'll be able to join us. And then after the final session in the nature theme in the summit, we're going to be closing everything out with our fantastic debate, nature versus technology. It's going to be live streamed, so if you can't come in person, you can still watch. But a huge thank you to the Foresight Group that have kindly agreed to host us in their fantastic offices at the Shard. So we're really looking forward to being there for that, and hope very much that you'll be able to join us. Okay, next slide, please. just a couple more activities coming up from the Global Compact Network UK. Our social mobility, improving business and webinars, improving business and society webinar series continues next week. And I just want to flag for you that last week we published a really big report, Measuring Up 2.0, highlighting how the UK is doing on the SDGs. And specific to today's events, we've done a lot of deep analysis on the UK's progress or lack thereof around strengthening biodiversity, conserving nature, and taking action on climate. So I highly recommend you have a look at that. Finally, if you're not following us on Twitter and LinkedIn, please do so. There's our addresses there. Please don't forget to use hashtag CA Summit 2022. And I hope you have a great afternoon. If we're not going to see you in an hour, but we really hope to see you again in an hour. If you haven't registered for that session, there's a link in the chat to do so, or just visit our website and you can find the link. Thanks again, speakers, and thanks for joining.